Hello, and so today we are going to talk a little bit about the Django Rest Framework serializers, which work in a pretty similar way to the Django regular forms. So it's a way to uh, validate the data and receive user input, validate and save or update some instance, and also is a way of translating complex objects into plain Python objects or dictionaries, so it's easily rendered as a JSON or a XML or YAML and any other formats. So let's first go here to the official documentation. And so basically on Django Rest Framework, you have two types of serializers. You have the raw serializer, and which you just import here from Rest Framework serializer and use this as just the serializer class. But you also have the model serializer. They both work in a very similar way, but the main difference there is that the model serializer knows how Django models work and how to update the data, how to save, how to create new instance, and how to make use of the model definition validations. But then the overall process on how the data is processed inside the serializer class is pretty much the same. And then something that I have already saw in past projects is that people tend to use mostly the model serializer, and whenever you need to write like a report or some data that is not in the format of a model, people tend to just create simple dictionaries and then like serialize them by hand, like just creating the dictionary and putting that as an output to the view class. But actually it's pretty nice what you can do with the raw serializer. So thought about creating a simple example here just before jumping to the code and creating some serializers for our application here. So I just want to illustrate how it works. I'm going to create a scratch file here. So this is what we are going to need. Okay. And let's say we are creating here like a person serializer. Okay, and this person should have like a first name, which is going to be a char field, and an age. Okay, she is going to be an integer field. And then maybe we can use the Python console to run this code. So let's go here. Okay, just pasting here the code so we can play around with it. And then at this point, Django Rest Framework doesn't care what type of instance, what type of object we are going to pass, as long as this instance has a callable or a property that is named first name and an age. And for example, we can use a mock object like from unit test. Oops. I can't remember from where mock is. Yeah. So let's just import this from here. And let's say I have here an instance, which is a person, has a first name and an age. Oops, it's an 32. So if you're not familiar with mock, this is an implementation that we use when we are writing unit tests. It's just like when you don't want to build a certain instance of a class and then you just want to mock this for the sake of simplicity, and you just know that at this point in your application you're going to have an object that looks like that. So this is very convenient to create test case because it makes your life way easier. But then this is going to be useful here when I'm going to illustrate how the serializer works. Because for example, let's say I'm creating an instance here of the person serializer, and I'm telling the instance is a person. Okay, and then I can check the data here. So what the serializer did is translating this complex object here into Python dictionary, and then the Django Rest Framework used this to render the data as a JSON, for example, and then you can import this from Rest Framework.renderers. So you can render the data as a JSON. And then you can install, for example, an XML or YAML renderer, and then just pass here the serializer.data. And then later on I'm going to show you in another video how those renderers work. But then that's the main thing here. So let's say we have here our class, which is going to be a person. Doesn't need to be a Django model. Then let's just do something like that to illustrate. So first name, right? So we don't need to use the mock object anymore. So here person is actually now going to be this new class. Okay, so let's create another serializer. I'm going to call serializer2 and person serializer, and then I'm going to pass as an instance the person here, and then serializer2.data works in the same way. So here you can see that the serializer implementation doesn't care what it's receiving. All it cares is that it must have a first name and an age. And then let's say it was like just name, for example. Okay, so I'm going to create here a new person. Is going to be Maria and 30. Oops. Then I'm going to pass this person data. Oops. So here you see we got an attribute error because the person model no longer have a field which matches what the serializer is expecting. So this is the main thing here. And then not all fields must be defined here that way, because for example we can use a calculated field. So instead of asking the age, let's just put back here the first main so we can use it that way. Let's say I want to pass here the birth date. Okay, so I'm passing here the birth date. But still I want to see the age of the person, and here we need to create a new field for the birth date. It's going to be a date field. And then the age no longer is going to be an integer field. So it's going to be a serializer method field. And then when we use this serializer method field, we can use this special method here, which is get and the name of your field. And then you're going to have the object here when the serializer executes. And then we can create something like that, like date. Let's import this here from datetime. So I'm importing here the date and today minus the object dot birth date. Okay, so I'm using here the date, and then we're just returning the delta here, which is going to be the number of days divided by 365 roughly. So, and then here this is going to be our serializer. Okay, let's just start over here so we have a clean workspace. Let's do the imports. So we have the serializer here. Right? And then our class. So let's create a person. It's going to be, the first name is going to be Vitor. And the birth date, let's put it like 88, 1 and 1. Okay. And now, if I create a person serializer, and I pass the instance being the person, when I call the serializer.data, you're going to see here the first name and the birth date. So you can say this here no longer is a date object, it's already a string, because that's the way it's going to serialize the data to be rendered. And the age is a calculated field based here. And this calculation could be either here on the class or on the serializer. So it really depends on your application and where it makes sense to have this information. And then now I'm on this example here, I'm just using the serializers to render the data, to process the data. But you can also use the serializer to validate the input. So let's say here you have, let's create a new serializer here as a person. And I'm gonna pass some data and see if it's valid. So here I'm passing an empty dictionary. Okay. So you can call the isValid method. And then this is returning false for me. And then you can check the errors here. Okay, so those two validations here, both on the first name and on the birth date, is because the default is required. So you must pass the two fields. So let's try again, like first name and birth date. Now let's try again. So now it's valid, and the natural step later on is to call the save method. And the thing is, here on this serializer, it doesn't know what to do with this data. And the main difference is that on the model serializer is going to save this instance on the database. But here, when you're using the raw serializer, you have to inform what the implementation is, okay? Because you can use that, for example, if it's a serializer for a comment field on your page, so you get the name of the person, the email, and the text. The save method here could be like sending an email or things like that. And so it's pretty broad in that sense. And let's say I want to create a custom validation here that doesn't allow the user to pass a birth date that is a date in the future, for example. And you have two hooks here. One of those hooks is creating a method called validate and then underscore and the name of the field. And then in this case, you're going to have here the value that you're going to receive. And then you always return the value, okay? And then you can do a check, like if the value is greater than date, not today, I'm going to add an error here. So you just raise an exception, which is a validation error from the serializers, which is this one here. And you just put a description, the birth date must be a date before today, let's say. Okay. And then let's try again. I'm just copying here this piece of code to the console, so it's easier to run. That's pretty much how I test new things when I'm developing some new code or algorithm. Sometimes if it's not too complicated, I just type everything here, but then when you have like a bigger piece of code, it's difficult to write all the code here on the console. But then I find it very convenient to play around with this. Hopefully it's not too confusing, but then we are going to explore an implementation on the code as well. But anyway, let's create again here a person serializer, and let's validate this information here. So first name, and then birth date. Let's put a future date here. And we check if the serializer is valid. And then if you want to know the errors. Okay. So this is passing here, and this is validating our field. And then if we try to provide other input, like 1988, let's check if this serializer is valid, true. So we are good to go here. And you have two options when you are implementing a serializer inside a view. You can either call the isValid and put that in a variable like serializer.isValid, and then you check. Or you can just create an if statement like if serializer.isValid, and then you save or do whatever with the data. Or if you're inside a view, you can simply do something like let's create an invalid serializer here. Okay. You can call the isValid with raise exception as true. So the REST framework is not going to handle the exception, so it's going to raise this validation error. But the good thing is that inside an API view, it's going to handle this and return a 400 error. So it's not going to be a 500 like an expected error. And then this is going to, sometimes most of the time I just use it like that. So you don't need to create a custom response for errors, and then everything is going to be way linear in your code. Okay. And then this is just for individual validations here. And let's say you want to create a validation that needs to look into multiple fields. So for example, if we had here both first name and last name, and they could be blank, for example, and we could have a validation that we must ask the user to provide at least the first name or the first name or the last name. And so here on the definition, we need to allow both to be blank, but they can only be blank on a condition. So here, in this case, we have the validate method. And here we get all the data from the serializer. And in a similar way, we should always return the data that we receive here on the parameter. And then you can create a validation like that, like if data not first name, or if there is no data on the first name and not last name, then we can add a new exception here. You must inform either the first name or last name. Okay, so let's update our serializer there. And then person serializer. So first name is going to be blank, last name is going to be blank, and birth date is going to be a valid date. Then let's check. Is valid? It's not valid. Let's see the errors. So we got here. And then it's very similar to the Django model form and forms in general, because they have these non-field errors here, which are errors that are not related to a particular field here. And we can check if it's working by creating, let's say, just put my last name here. So now the serializer is valid and it's good to go. And both things work here for the model serializer and the regular serializer. And yeah. Okay, so I was going to show now a hands-on example on the pig bank project that we have been developing for the past videos, but this tutorial grew bigger than I expected, so I'm cutting this here, and on the next tutorial we are going to build a report based on the transaction model, and we are going to use both a serializer to read the parameters for the report and another one to render the data in a format that's not attached to a particular Django model. So I'll see you on the next video. Bye bye.